relevance does the great artistic wealth of the past have for the contemporary painter of the human figure?
I thought that a useful way of exploring this question might be to look at the relationship between painting and antique sculpture throughout history.
A central ambition of the Renaissance period was to recreate something of the magnificence of ancient Roman art. The problem for the painters was that the painting of the ancient world had been all but lost. Pompeii would not be rediscovered until the 18th century. Artists could only imagine the paintings described by the ancient writers and had no choice but to attempt to reconstruct them via a study of a far more durable art form, sculpture.
The figure sculpture of antiquity showed them the technical refinement, naturalness, proportion, and eloquent poses that they wanted to bring to their painting. At the centre of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence is the magnificent room known as the Tribuna, built for Francesco I de' Medici and completed around 1584 by the architect Buontalenti. It was the first space in modern Europe designed specifically for the display of works of art. The sculptures it contains were some of the most celebrated of their day. Taking centre stage in the Tribuna is its most prized work, the Medici Venus. This provided the source for one of the history of painting's most celebrated images, Botticelli's Birth of Venus.
The Medici Venus was in turn derived from one of the most famous works of art in antiquity, the Venus of Cnidos. This now lost work by Praxiteles was the first large-scale sculpture of the female nude in history.
This cult image of the goddess was said to be so beautiful that upon seeing it, male visitors to her shrine at Cnidos would lose their heads and fall madly in love. Venus is shown entering a purifying ritual bath. The Uffizi version, one of countless examples, is of a type known as Venus Pudica, a reference to the position of the arms with which she modestly covers herself, although what really makes the pose so successful and so enduring is the effect this gesture has of both concealing and at the same time drawing attention to the body. The arrangement of the arms complements the so-called contrapposto pose. Contrapposto is an invention of classical Greek art referring to a stance where the weight of the body rests on one leg, leaving the other relaxed. As a result of this position, the axes of the head, limbs and torso are pushed slightly away from the horizontal or vertical, creating an effect which is dynamic yet harmonious. Not far from the Medici Venus in the Uffizi is another antique sculpture of the same type. The loss of the arms is regrettable, but this has the effect of concentrating the viewer's attention on the subtle shifts of plane and mass produced by the contrapposto. I find it remarkable that the original idea of these sculptures is so powerful that even copies of copies restored by much later hands are still able to convey a vivid sense of graceful movement. It is as though the ghost of the original idea continues to inhabit the fragment. The fundamentally anthropomorphic character of Western art and the relationship between three-dimensional and two-dimensional representations is at the heart of an institution which served very much as a model for the art academies of Europe. The Accademia delle Arti del Disegno was established by Giorgio Vasari in Florence in 1563. The linked circles of its logo represent the three principal visual arts: painting, sculpture and architecture. According to the theory of the day, these disciplines were unified by the common principle of disegno.
Disegno is an Italian word which has no exact equivalent in English, as it refers to drawing both as representation but also as design, invention. For Florentine artists, steeped in Neoplatonic theory, Visual appearances were but a flawed expression of an underlying divine perfection.
The key to making contact with this unseen reality was a careful study of what was considered to be the pinnacle of all creation, the human form. The rather mystical process whereby imperfect bodies were both objectively scrutinized and at the same time imaginatively transformed was called disegno. The centrality of the figure to all three arts was emphasized by Vasari's friend Michelangelo when he said that it was all but impossible to be a competent architect without first having an understanding of the human figure. By the 18th century, the tribuna was an obligatory stop for any self-respecting art connoisseur. It is here the setting for an imaginary collection of the most admired works in the city, along with a group of lifelike portraits, here rendered in astonishing detail by Johann Zoffany. It is sometimes easy to forget that in past centuries, sculpture enjoyed a far greater prestige than painting. Travellers on the Grand Tour made a beeline for the Laocoon or the Medici Venus, rushing past works which today would be considered unmissable.
This kind of taste informed the Royal Academies of England and France and their equivalents throughout Europe, state-sponsored institutions intended to foster excellence in the visual arts. They flourished at the time of the Enlightenment and sought to achieve their aims through a scrutiny of famous works of art and through a systematic and rational study of perspective, anatomy and the like.
Sculpture in the form of original works and plaster casts played an important role in the training of 18th century painters. Painting in this period was categorised according to a strict hierarchy, with the humbler genre of still life and landscape subordinate to history painting. History painting is the name given to those grand pictorial narratives taken from history, literature or the Bible, intended to provide the public with morally uplifting examples of what were thought to be humanity's noblest moments. These were subjects for the most ambitious artists, for whom not only was a study of the living figure essential, but also an assimilation of the ideal beauty of classical sculpture as a means of giving appropriate form to the lofty ideals of the story. A perfectly developed physique, regular features and satisfying proportion were the hallmarks of the rational, neoclassical style. The leading practitioners of this idiom were able to see beyond its stylistic refinements and adapt the clarity of antique art to their message. Roman sarcophagi, with their frieze-like arrangement of figures in a shallow space, have clearly informed Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatii. His protagonists appear before us with the directness of a slogan daubed upon a wall. By the mid-19th century, the gods and heroes of antiquity were seen as irrelevant to a society characterised by newspapers, train travel and scientific discovery, and the demand for this kind of engagement with social and political issues diminished. As the century progressed, artists retreated from the public sphere into the private. Though the earlier system of education persisted for a long time, art students continued to spend long hours drawing from casts, and in the life room, producing carefully finished works. Exercises which had their origin in the grand scheme of art production, culminating in ambitious history paintings, were now an end in themselves, and the academies, or isolated nude figure studies, became the format within which the formal experiments giving birth to modernism could take place.
Sculpture continued to be an important point of reference for painters well into the 20th century, not so much as a means of developing a rarefied ideal of beauty, but rather as an opportunity to study those arrangements of form and configurations of pose which gave full rein to the body's expressive potential.
Paul Cézanne made endless copies of sculpture in the Louvre, and the structure and inner rhythms of Greek and later works inform his landscape as much as his figure work. Picasso, in a quest for imagery which confronted the viewer with a world of myth and the primordial forces of nature, made a close study of the austere forms of archaic Greek sculpture. Pierre Bonnat also looked to the ancient world, although for this artist, classical antiquity was rather an evocation of bodily contentment, a timeless world of drowsy pleasure by the shores of the Mediterranean. His Siesta of 1900 is a direct quotation of the well-known hermaphrodite in the Louvre. Here he metamorphoses his wife Marthe into a reclining nymph. An awareness of the enduring appeal of specific poses can be seen in one of art history's most influential sculptures, Sleeping Ariadne, a Roman copy of a Hellenistic work originally thought to represent Cleopatra. On a visit to the Uffizi some years ago, I was pleased to see this work on display for the first time, and I resolved to return one day to make some drawings of it. Ariadne was the mythical daughter of King Minos of Crete. It was her ball of string which helped Theseus find his way back through the labyrinth after he had killed the Minotaur. The story tells that Theseus then took the princess to the island of Naxos, only to sail away, leaving her there alone. The Uffizi sculpture shows Ariadne yet to awaken to find that her lover has departed. Michelangelo made drawings of this, and it became the touchstone for one of his most important works, Dawn in the Medici Chapel. Ariadne was for a time kept in the garden of the Villa Medici in Rome, where she makes a cameo appearance in Velázquez's sparkling plein-air study. It was here that Nicolas Poussin made a wax copy of her, and echoes of this memorable pose can be found throughout his compositions. Poussin was looking for a configuration which would bring the profane world of the Roman poet Ovid to life. Michelangelo, by contrast, speaks about the passing of time and the heavy mood associated with that. In fact, Ariadne's pose could be said to embody both of these interpretations. Perhaps Gian Lorenzo Bernini's extraordinary conflation of sacred and sensual, the ecstasy of St. Teresa, owes something to Ariadne's dreamy abandon.
It's interesting to note that in the case of Ariadne, the artists who draw their inspiration from her pose don't attempt an exact recreation of it.
Perhaps the appeal of this work somehow lies in the way in which the concentration of the abrupt angles of the head and arms act as a kind of foil for the broad rhythms of the legs and torso, and that it is these particular relationships which have somehow captured the imagination of artists who have not felt the need to slavishly copy the whole arrangement. On returning to the Uffizi to make drawings of Ariadne, I was disappointed to find that she had been moved to a room inaccessible to the public. Similarly, another version kept in the Vatican could not be seen. It was almost as if her custodians had discreetly removed them from noisy museum visitors so that they could resume their slumber uninterrupted, forever waiting, as the story tells us, for Bacchus to arrive and carry them off. When I was a student in the 1980s, while figure drawing was an important part of my training, there was a widespread belief in many, if not most, art schools that this practice had been made redundant by the predominance of abstract and avant-garde art. Since that time, there has been an enormous resurgence of interest in skill-based figurative drawing and painting, suggesting that the impulse to depict the human image goes far deeper than any theory or fashion. While there is no shortage of brilliantly able practitioners around the world today, I feel that the part of figure painting which is concerned with design, the inventive aspect of the disegno process, as it were, is often neglected. Which brings me back to Ariadne and the possibilities she has presented to artists over the centuries. I'm going to make some studies directly from the model with the intention of creating my own Ariadne pose and seeing where that will take me. Keeping in mind that the process of working closely from nature means that all my ideas, influences and good intentions will probably recede from my consciousness leaving me alone with the subject. In the end, the focus is on the unforgiving process of observation, selection and mark-making, and in spite of all my deliberation, it is invariably the aspects of my work over which I have no control, which come about of their own accord, which I think matter the most.
So, my small contribution to the considerable body of Ariadne-inspired works.
I'm thinking of incorporating this figure in a large landscape composition with other figures, but that will have to be for another time.